Hey, security peeps, we are back again in the Breaking Into Cybersecurity podcast. I am here with my co-host, Chris Foulon. Say hi to everyone, Chris.
Hey, everyone.
And with our special guest today, Wolfgang von Sturmer. Say hi to everyone, Wolfgang.
Hello, everybody.
So Wolfgang is actually a CIO making the transition into the cybersecurity space. And he is probably the first executive CIO that we've had on making this transition. Wolfgang also has a background in music. So he has an undergraduate degree. He's a published musician. And Wolfgang, I want you to just jump right in and tell us about your career, like how you started with a background in music and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Sure, yeah. So hello, everybody from the New York University Center for Cybersecurity. I'm glad to be on this podcast. And it all started with a love of music and a love of computers. So I did a degree in Germany in musical composition, music theory, and computer music. And that was in the late 80s. So computer music was fairly awkward and cumbersome at the time. But I really liked the technology aspect of it. And then after I completed my degree, I came to the United States, and it was at the beginning of the essentially the internet time, or the ramping up on where the internet became more, the public became more aware of the internet. And I decided that I really wanted to be part of something that I felt like would change the world. So I reoriented myself to be more technology focused, and self-trained myself to be aware of internet technologies and what's required to build websites and basic web technology, and started working in that industry. And from one job to the other, ended up in the digital .com area, and worked for a variety of media companies, and then eventually started my own company, which was focused on high performance computing, and then went back to media as a CTO and CIO, which I have now been doing for the last 20-something years. That's in a nutshell.
Wow, that's quite a background. So how involved were you in the aspects of security in some of those roles? And what was your interest in shifting over to being solely security focused?
Yeah, so I always had an interest in the security aspect and the hacking aspect and the subculture aspect of technology. So I had been following the hacking scene since over 15 years. Always went to a variety of hacker conferences, and was really intrigued by how technology could be looked at from a different perspective, and how it could be analyzed and examined and understood in a very, very deep, fundamental way. That probably stemmed from when I was in university in Germany. During the day I was studying, but at night I was moonlighting as a software engineer for robotics engineering, and that involved a lot of very low-level assembly language programming, and I really did like that. Debugging meant putting pins on the CPU with like a digital oscilloscope to see what the cycles in the CPU were, and then you had to take a calculator to transform that into hexadecimal code and figure out where you were in the program. And that was a very intriguing, very deep insight into how the technology actually works on a very low level. And for some reason, that just struck with me for the rest of my technology career. So I had always been interested in really deeply understanding of how something works, and maybe that's a reflection of a desire to understand how the world in itself works, and really getting a good understanding of what makes something and how does it function, and how can you improve it, of course, once you have that understanding, but then also what flaws might be in it. So I've always tried to have that curiosity and seeking of knowledge as part of my career. And again, the internet in its early days really just presented itself as an opportunity to do something exciting in a field that humankind hadn't seen before. And I really was convinced that it would change the world, and as we know, it did. So I guess I made the right choice to move over to that. I haven't given up entirely on music. I still work in music, and I still produce music, compose things. So that's kind of my hobby. But the interest in hacking has always been there. And when I started as a CIO in the current job, the latest job, about 10 years ago, there was not really the distinction between information security officer and chief information officer. It was just expected to be part of the role, and there wasn't really a label for it. So I think there was not even a term CISO really existing about 10 years ago. So we had, like, at my company and the parent company, we didn't have a CISO. We only got a CISO like maybe 5 years in, or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and when security really became top of mind,
right,
of boards and senior management, and that's why when they decided to hire a CISO. But before that, it was just expected that data protection and network protection, IT security protection is part of your role and part of your job.
Right. That sounds very similar. We had Alan on our podcast, Alan Alford on our podcast a few days ago, and he pretty much said the same exact thing, that there was, 20 years ago when he got into the field, there wasn't really a technical term. It was, a part of your technology role. I know you made the pivot and you got into this prestigious program over at NYU. What's been exciting about being in it? And I know it's relatively new, that you just started it, I believe, in August or September. So tell me about how that's going and what it's like now being a student and getting a master's degree, being an executive in a student space right now with the other cyber folks that are there.
Well, the visit to the cafeteria is always interesting because you become aware a little bit of that you're mid-career, and a lot of undergraduates are starting their career, so that's an interesting experience. But no, it's exciting, and the course here at NYU Tandon, I think is fairly new. I think we're the second cohort now that is doing the specific master's focused on cybersecurity. It's a 2 to 3 year program, and it's very very technical, and highly the Cyber Fellows program, which is the program that I'm in, which is a supported program by the New York City Cyber Command and various industry sponsors and also government, is very aligned to the NSA cyber defense and cyber resiliency program. So it's highly technical. And I think that's what made it interesting to me, because I started training for the CISSP certification, and I realized that it covers a lot of ground, but it doesn't get very technical. So I don't want to discredit the CISSP, but if you love programming and if you love coding and you have an ability to do that, then the CISSP doesn't get into that territory. And with the master's program, I saw an opportunity to really dive in deeper into the real technical aspects of cybersecurity and really understand how an attacker, how an adversary would think and what technologies they would apply to get into a company's network or get to a company's data. And I felt like if I really want to succeed in my responsibility to proactively and actively protect a company and their intellectual property, I would have to have a good deep level and technical understanding of what the adversaries might be doing, because they're getting more sophisticated and they're getting more advanced. And it's not just about mere protection and building the walls higher. You have to really get to a state of cyber resiliency in order to protect the company correctly, and in the future. And in order to do that, I felt like you have to have a really good, deep technical understanding.
And was there, when you did your research for a master's opportunity, was there a reason that you chose NYU over, say, the SANS Technical Institute, which is also known for providing that in-depth technical training, or Carnegie Mellon's Institute? What was your reasoning for going with that particular university?
Well, it's, I live in New York, so there was a convenience factor, of course, that the campus is about 4 subway stops away from my house, and it was easy to get to. But that aside, when I did a preparation course early in this year, I didn't know yet that I would get into the master's program, because it was not guaranteed if you do the preparation course. So the preparation course was basically for people who come from a liberal arts degree or a non-computer science degree, to get them up to speed with a computer science undergraduate level. And it was a very intense course that felt like having another full-time job for about 6 months. And but it was a very good course, so it set a really good foundation. And that was entirely online. So I did that with basically just, let's see what happens. Let's see how the course goes, and what do I come out with out of it. And I passed the grade. So there wasn't really a need for me to research other opportunities or other universities, because it was more or less guaranteed when you get the grade, you can apply for the master's program and you get in, and you also get the Cyber Fellows Scholarship, which covers a large portion of the tuition. And that's, of course, always nice if someone pays for your education. You don't say no to that.
That's for sure. So, Wolfgang, you talked a little bit about being in your role, kind of growing up into a CIO and being in the role that you were in. And like 5 years ago, they had the CISOs. And I know, when you and I have spoken in the past, we talked about other folks that were under you when you partnered with the CISO, who had either transitioned into security, or who were those security professionals that you had to manage, or the tech professionals that you had to manage. So my question is around, what skills did you see as prominent skills overall with the people coming from a leader? Since you're, an executive and a leader, what are some of the skills that you saw that may not have necessarily been technical, but overall that made good tech professionals, good cyber professionals in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just advice to the community, and I think that was also mentioned in one of the previous podcasts that I listened to. I think communication skills are a key factor for anybody in any role, really, but especially in a leadership and in an executive level role, because you have to interface with a lot of people that are not technical, that are not in the IT world. And IT concepts, and specifically cybersecurity concepts, can get very complex and very difficult to explain. So, and also sometimes the reasoning behind it. I mean, there's always the trade-off between security and usability, right? So we can secure our companies, but we can, by doing so, we might make them entirely unusable. So you always have to find the balance between doing the right level of IT security application within an organization, and still making it possible for people to do their regular work. So that requires communication. It requires communication to the executive leadership, to mid-level managers, and to the staff. So if you have that, then you have pretty good chances to be a good placement into any kind of role. But what happened at my company was that we basically realized that data is the new top priority asset that we need to protect. I'm working in the marketing communications industry. So what we have a lot of data from our clients that then they entrust us to protect and keep confidential. And the healthcare sector specifically, which is the sector that I worked in, has a lot of pharmaceutical companies. So they have very sensitive data. Sometimes it's data about things that are that haven't reached the market yet. So they're highly confidential, and you need to keep them secure. So we felt like that there's a need for really building out what we call a digital risk practice. And into that function, we recruited, or the CISO recruited various people, including me, that showed an interest in paying specifically attention to the need to protect data and to focus on cybersecurity. And it was a global effort. It was a global initiative. So we recruited people from every country and where we had offices that basically stood up and said, I have an interest in working in this area. And then there were certain people who had certain domain expertise. Some people knew Active Directory better than others. So they were a natural addition to the team because we had a project like Active Directory cleanup, where we would really look at the scenario of do we have the privilege of the principle of least privilege really applied here, so that people only have access to what they need to, and there's no unused accounts that just stay open. So we did some AD cleanup, and we needed experts for that, and we recruited them. But the bottom line is still that they had to be good communicators, right? So because they had to work with the team, and they had to then communicate some of those tactical things that came out of the strategic initiative back to their local offices and to the management in their offices, and that requires good communication and ability to really convey the idea in plain English, and that's what I come across on a regular basis across my entire career over the last 20 years, that you have to be able to explain complex things in natural language to people who are the decision makers, because at the end of the day, the business is the one who makes the decisions as to how much risk do they want to bear, and what initiatives they want to support to mitigate that risk.
Speaking of the risk management program and how much risk that your organization is willing to bear from a security aspect, what were some of the, if any, challenges in balancing the risk that the organization had versus the mitigations that would need to be put in place to properly secure the organization or help secure the organization?
You mean what types of actions we took to do
Correct.
that?
Yeah, and how did the business take it, whether you had to explain it in a different way, or how did you communicate it to them that these are the challenges and this is what you have to do and this is the possible downside, things like that?
Right. I mean, the one argument that always is good is like nobody likes to be ending up in the paper, right? With some cybersecurity incident. So you can always use that you're working towards keeping them out of the headlines. Mm-hmm. But some of the actions that we took is the company that I worked for had grown through acquisition and mergers. So it's a historical growth over time. And with that, you have the scenario that when you bring entities together, very often they're only being put together on the finance level, in terms of the books are being put together, right? But the IT groups were more or less left alone. So you have the scenario where you have a lot of different chefs cooking the dinner, and different security principles were applied. So one initiative that we took was to try to really streamline the security posture and make it standardized or consolidated. So we did things like looking into like what servers are in the DMZ and do they really have to be in the DMZ. Some internal network scans to find out whether there were some open FTP servers still there that really shouldn't be there, because we shouldn't be using FTP anymore, unsecure FTP that is. And then again, the Active Directory cleanup, because with the industry that I'm in, there's a lot of churn of people coming and going. And you have to make sure that when someone leaves the company, they really don't have access anymore, and that requires the constant cleanup of the identity access management systems. So those were some of the things that we did as kind of like the first things to do spring cleaning in our house. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I wanted to go back to what you said about some of the folks that you had on the team that came in. It sounds like it was cross-functional, that there were people that came in from, raise their hand. So was it a volunteer effort almost, where when the CISO, you and the CISO brought in multiple people from various teams and you were one of them? Was it one of these situations where was it like a volunteer to work on this particular program, or were, people hands picked and selected?
All of that.
Yeah.
Both. So there were people who raised a hand, like me, who said, I really want to work with you on this.
Yeah.
I had come across the CISO, the global CISO, before, when it came to Sarbanes-Oxley IT audits and the general computing controls. So because compliance was part of my remit. To look after SOX compliance and then GDPR compliance too, when that came out last year. So he knew that I had that interest and that I had some of these responsibilities. So I just raised my hand. But then there were people who we were just aware of, that they had certain skills that were security mappable, and then we also went outside and worked with. I think some university in the UK, and had some interns from the university, from some computer cybersecurity program that they had over there. And then we also hired some outside people.
Right. The reason why I bring it up is because, especially with the folks that are trying to break in, it's been a consistent theme with the leaders that we've spoken to over the last couple of weeks in regards to a couple different things. One, the transferable skills. So you talk about communication, that's transferred across the board. I mean, that's like Chris Roberts is always screaming that. Like once a week, I feel like I see something around communication. Secondly, the leaders were able to upskill and cross-train. So it sounds like folks had different types of experiences. Everyone's bringing different pieces to the puzzle. Some, you raised your hand and said, I volunteer. Some people were chosen and picked and then, recruited. But that combination of skills that was coming into the table and the cross-training and the being able to move within the company, which is something that I think that people as a whole don't focus on as much. And a lot of the times when people are trying to break into the industry, especially in larger organizations, one of the first pieces of advice that I tend to give is to look within. So if you're going to school and you're getting a master's and you're in audit, for example, you're an accountant or you have some other background and you want to transition, many times they look outside of their organization when you could easily be raising your hand for volunteer efforts and getting on projects like this that would give an additional layer of experience to bring you over into security. So I just want to highlight that you to make that, to kind of draw that in, because over the last, we did 3 podcasts in 3 days, and the 3 of you are pretty much saying the exact same thing, with people volunteering, raising their hands, and coming over from within the organization. And that's how Chris got here from the help desk. I got into security from HR. Like all of us have gotten in here from another, somewhere else within the organization and transitioned over. So I just want to highlight.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I just was at a cybersecurity conference yesterday where it was highlighted that it should be a joint effort between military, government, academia, and the private sector. And it's very clear that cybersecurity is going to be, has always been, but moving forward even more so, needs to be a team effort, right? You can't practice cybersecurity in the corner, and then the rest of your company is not on board, right? So, I mean, if you take the time and you want to get into this field and you start going to conferences or meetings and you hear speakers, you will hear over and over again that some of the biggest threats are things like insider threat, right? So that's the people that you work with on a daily basis. And sometimes the insider threat isn't even intentional or malicious. It's just they're not aware, or they're not educated and trained enough about this aspect of their work, because they try to do good work in whatever field they're working in, and in the discipline that they're in, and cybersecurity is not on top of their mind, right? So weak passwords, no multi-factor authentication being applied, all of that can easily lead to an exploitable insider threat. But that's why it's a team effort, right? So it doesn't require just the CISO to say, oh, our policies have clearly defined what the password policy is, and therefore now we're secure. Just because it's in the policy doesn't mean that it's being executed that way and that's being done that way. So that's again where the communication skills come into the picture. But then there's also a lot of other mappable skills from other IT disciplines that can be transformed into having relevance in the cybersecurity field. The specialized skills, like someone who is really able to configure firewall, those will be the specialist people on your team. Or vulnerability scans, you can get outside companies to do that. You can get outside contractors to do that. So if you are taking on security responsibilities within your company, then you're not necessarily needing to have an expertise in all of the skills, because that's not going to be possible. You really can't do that. I think it helps to specialize and help to define a certain focus. I mean, for me, making the decision to go back to school, and I can also touch on that in a minute of why I made the decision to go back to school. Even in the first 3 months, 2 months being at NYU, I have really found a renewed interest in reverse engineering, but probably because of my assembly language and robotics background back 25 years ago. Reverse engineering of binary code is something that I now do on a Sunday evening as a fun thing to do, right? So not everybody would pick that as a hobby, but
you're crazy.
But I really enjoy that, and there's things like capture the flag activities out there that you can really use to hone your skills, and you can do that in your own time, right? So you don't even need to go to a degree program or to a certification course to do that. You can just find an area of interest and then do capture the flag activities in that, and really broaden your knowledge that way. And you will find that there's already something from the work you have been doing in IT that will be helpful to sharpen your skills in the cybersecurity field, even though you didn't know about it. But when you start looking and when you start identifying areas of interest in the cybersecurity field, you will see that what you had done already in your career in IT, it will be very applicable.
Yeah, and not only, sorry, Chris, I'll just jump in. Not only in your career in IT, and that's the thing. I want people to remember, and I say it over and over again. When you brought up that insider threat piece, that was literally exactly what I was drawn to, because I was coming with my HR mindset in mind. So you think about all the people who are, all these threats that are happening in the insider threat, and I was sitting there raising my hand like, hey, is anyone talking to HR? Because, again, insider threat, people internally, employees, all that stuff. So It's not only what you're bringing from IT, but what you're bringing from all different areas of what you've been doing in security.
Right, and that's where the sorry, Chris. Let me just answer that. No, because it's interesting, because I did realize that that maybe like towards the end, the last 3 years of my activity as a CIO, that the interfacing with the HR team was key, right? Because there's one point when you have an employee's attention for things IT, which is when they start in the company, right? So we revised the entire training program as to what introduction to technology and acceptable use of technology resources and what expectations on data protection are there, so that they can come to this with a fresh mind and really have an awareness right from the beginning, so it's not an afterthought. Because when they're eager to get their work computer, that's the time when you can tell them, don't put the password on a sticky note on the front of your screen. Not
Right.
good practice.
The question I was going to ask earlier, you started mentioning your Sunday evening activity of reverse malwaring. So outside of school and that activity, what other ways do you keep up with the ever-evolving industry that you can recommend to those looking to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, so I try to now focus on, when it comes to conferences that are directly related to the field. I mean, being a general CIO, I had to go, or I did go to many events and CIO roundtables that were focused on all things that concern a CIO, like cloud computing, moving to the cloud, mobile transformation, digital transformation, all that. So now I try to really hone in and make time for mostly cybersecurity related conferences and events. I try to attend as many webinars as my time permits, because I don't need to leave my desk. I can just do it just like this. It's very convenient. Networking, like trying to find people who have something interesting and valuable to say about the field, some new insights in an area that you have maybe identified as a special area of interest. So apart from reverse engineering, I also have an interest in cryptology. So reading various cryptology blogs, or Bruce Schneier obviously is a good person to follow. In that regard, I do have his book. Didn't read the whole thing yet, but I have it. Just like basically start digging around on the internet as to like what do people have to say about this? Who's someone who has new insights, or and try to learn from that, and have an awareness of what other people say, because it is an ever evolving field and you can't really cover everything. There's only 24 hours in the day, so try to find the areas that strike a chord with you, and then hone in and focus on people that have something smart to say.
Awesome. Well, we just tipped over the half-an-hour mark. We're a little bit over half an hour. So Chris usually asks this question, but I will do it today. Coming again, because you're an executive, because you have interfaced with the board, you're one of these people that I think a lot of industry, cybersecurity professionals and professionals, just technical professionals as a whole, would look up to. And so my question to you would be, one piece of sage advice coming from an executive that looks down and sees all these people in this organization, what piece of advice would you give to a person either trying to break into security, just trying to grow in the technology space? What piece of advice would you give to that person looking up to you?
Okay, well, I have to watch my words because I should probably take my own advice. Well, I think I'm going to go back to the ability to identify cross-mappable skills. And I do recall that there was an article and I'm a member of the IEEE Computer Society and the ACM and OWASP. So there was an article in one of these organizations' magazines, I can't remember exactly where, that addressed exactly that. It was someone who was very versed in cybersecurity, had been in the field for many years, and she highlighted that the industry isn't doing enough to encourage people to really cross-train and use the foundation that they have from their previous technology experience to really then concentrate and focus on specific aspects in cybersecurity that they can be trained into. And she was encouraging companies to really make an effort to put in more energy to train people to be good in the role in cybersecurity that they're having a need for.
Right.
So I think my advice would be, and again, I'm trying to take my own advice, go after where your passion is. If you feel passionate about cybersecurity, and I certainly do so, then find ways to make that clear to yourself and also express it to the world by doing things like getting certification, or in my case, going, find a new university where you can have a degree program, and really make it clear to yourself and the world that this is an area that you want to work in, and believe in yourself that you can succeed in that, because the need is there, and the world is not just filled with experts who have been born into cybersecurity. Pretty much everybody who works in technology or cybersecurity has somehow grown into the role. And if you have mappable skills and also soft skills in a broad way, then you will probably be able to find something that's a fit, and you will be able to succeed.
Perfect. Excellent advice. Well, thank you so much, Wolfgang, for being with
pleasure.
us today. We will see everyone again on the next episode of Breaking into Cybersecurity. Have a good one.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.